Welcome to Christie's Art Forum. My name is Elaine Kwok. I run the Christie's education programs here in Asia. And today our forum topic is 250 years of taste, culture, and collecting. The forum is very much in celebration of Christie's 250th anniversary. 250 years really is quite a long time. The other night I was thinking of it. In 1766, when James Christie had his first sale, France was still a monarchy. America was a British colony. And in China, it was the Qianlong Emperor who reigned. So after all this time, it's incredible that people are, still buying and selling works of art. Christie still has a place. And today I'm very happy to have 4 panelists here. And together I did a little calculation. We don't quite have 250 years of art market experience, but we have, a good 120, 130 years. So to my left, first it's Robert Cao. He's a very important collector from Taiwan and on Christie's Asia Advisory Board. Then we have François Curial, Christie's chairman of Asia Pacific, an old veteran of Christie's from 1969. Then we have Daphne King, who comes from a family very closely involved with the arts and runs Allison Fine Arts, which celebrates its 35th anniversary this year. And then there's Jonathan Stone, who joined Christie's in 1989 and is now our international chairman for Asian art. So I thought we'd start with François, who joined Christie's in 1969. Could you tell us about how the firm was like that year? And could you go through for each decade, maybe the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s? If you could give us a theme for each decade, what would they be?
Well, first of all, Elaine, this was 48 years ago. So how does one remember?
Oh, you remember.
Things? When I joined Christie's in 1969, there were 200 employees there. 198 of them were British, and there were 2 foreigners. There was an Italian person who worked for us in Italy, and for some reason the chairman of the firm there decided that the whole of Europe could be covered from Italy, so there was 1 foreigner, Italian gentleman, and me. And there they thought, well, 2 foreigners in the firm, that's fine, because there's an old story going on at Christie's, I don't know whether it's true or not, but that before the war, when a letter arrived from abroad with a foreign stamp, it was either not opened or thrown in the garbage or kept for at the end of the month where there was nothing much else to do to open it, because if it came from the continent or from anywhere else but England, it could not be important. Well, things have changed a lot since. At that time also, in 1969, 50% of our sales came from 2 departments, all master pictures and furniture. Today, furniture is about 3% of sales, all masters are about 5% of sales. Our big departments are post-war and contemporary, between 35 and 40%, and impressionist and modern, jewelry being 12%. So can you imagine the shift, and can you imagine what would have happened to Christie's had we not reacted and adapted to the market? I would probably not be in front of you today, and we would probably be talking about Christie's as, yes, this very fine old firm in the 18th and 19th century. I believe they're in the north of London now selling brown furniture, but I don't even know whether they exist. Well, we do exist 250 years later, having adapted to this change in the market, which over more than 40 years now has changed from a focus on 17th, 18th, and even now 19th century to 20th and 21st century, whereby new departments like design, pop art, comics are extremely important. So that's the change I've seen now in my 40 years at Christie's.
A theme for each decade?
The recurring theme and the common denominator is the globalization. What else is new? A bit of a cliche, but in our case, it's true. When I joined Christie's, there was 1 office in London and an office in Rome, and that's about it. Today, we are in 56 countries, 16 sale rooms, so it's clients from all over the world. Today, 30% of what Christie's sells goes to Asia, and within this 30%, 80% goes to China, this is something which was impossible to imagine only 20 years ago. So globalization and move towards 20th and 20th century within 40 years. But it's difficult to be so precise 10 years by 10 years.
Okay, let's move on to Daphne. Your family has been involved with the arts for a long time. Could you tell us about how the engagement started, and what was the art market in Hong Kong like in the 80s when your parents were collecting Chinese ceramics and when your mother founded Alice in Fine Arts?
Yeah, so I think our family, when Elaine says our family's been in the arts for a while, I think I could say it's probably about 3 generations. My grandfather, although he was a shipping magnate, he started Orient Overseas Container Line, but he was a major art patron. And when he was traveling on all his business trips overseas, he would often make it a point to visit artists, young artists, such as Zhao Qi at the time in the 50s and 60s in Paris, or Zhang Daqian when he was in Brazil. My grandfather would often visit. And in fact, he was very good friends with Zhang Daqian, and whenever Zhang Daqian came to Hong Kong, he would stay with him at his house. And upon his death, he did a plaque on his memorial that still is there today. So that it started with my grandfather, and then my mother, when she was young, she was very lucky, and she traveled with my grandfather on his business trips and got to meet these different artists. And I remember my mother telling this funny story about when one of the container ships was being scrapped here in Hong Kong. She went to go kind of tidy up and make sure there wasn't anything valuable left behind on the ships before it got scrapped. And lo and behold, behind one of the sofas, she found a Tang Yu painting, an oil painting, which now is worth millions and millions of dollars. So my grandfather must have met him when he was on his trip to Paris and collected his paintings then, just to be supportive. So that's the story from my grandfather and then to my mother. And then I think for myself, the 3rd generation, I also was lucky enough and had the opportunity to go around with my mother when I was young, going to visit museums, seeing amazing shows, and not only meeting artists, but also music and dance was all very much part of our cultural upbringing. And so actually I also remember when I was young in college, I had the opportunity to intern at Christie's one summer. And in those days, it was in the late 80s, nothing was computerized and everything was done by hand. And during the summer, there were not very many auctions, and so they were tidying up their archives, and I would sit there with these little index cards and write down all the auction results on the index cards and then file them away. So that was my experience at Christie's. And then I guess talking about Hong Kong in the 1980s, my mother founded Alice in Fine Arts in 1981. And at that time, Hong Kong was somewhat of a cultural desert, although I don't think it's fair to say it was completely a cultural desert, because there were people collecting. They were collecting more antiques and ceramics, but not Chinese contemporary art. So Chinese contemporary art was something new. When the gallery started, it was a steep education for clients and people in general. I think in Hong Kong at that time, people would prefer to spend a couple $1,000s on designer handbags or designer clothes rather than art. And that was just how it was in the 80s.
Right. Yeah. Well, Jonathan, you started at Christie's in London in 1989. We heard in 1969 when François started, there were 2 employees who were not British. So by 1989, has the firm become more international? What was it like?
There were probably 4 international employees, of which I was masquerading as one because I'd spent some time in Japan, and this was the late 1980s when the Japanese were buying so much. That obviously they thought I was a good addition as a foreigner manqué. But it had actually moved on, joking apart. I think Christie's had moved on by the late 1980s. The overseas office was still a room at the top of the stairs on the left where the foreigners were kind of corralled. And it still was a very, very British, clubbable kind of company. I remember in my interview, the person, he's still around actually, so I'm going to be discreet about names, but he said to me, well, of course, you know, Jonathan, we don't always exactly employ the sons of dukes necessarily, but we at least employ people who grow up with proper pictures on the walls, which kind of put me completely in my place. But I think it has moved on a lot since then. And not only is it about the connections, which clearly was the point of the Sons of the Dukes, but it's also about the professionalism that has been brought to Christie's, and the way that the market has expanded, and Christie's has kept abreast of the expansion of the market. The creation of something like this in Hong Kong would be very hard to think about, I think, all those years ago. But having said that, I think the one continuing really strong theme is always about the passion of the collectors, whether it was people collecting old masters and furniture, or whether it's people collecting contemporary art now, or Chinese works of art. The passion over these 250 years for the collectors is really something that's never diminished. Whatever you're collecting, I think the enthusiasm, that love of collecting, and the excitement that comes from the auction process is something which has been the continuum. And it's really that I think is the great story of 250 years.
Thank you, Jonathan. Now on to Bob. You started collecting in the mid-1990s, and I've read that you said that Taiwan came into collecting later than Hong Kong. Could you tell us a little bit about that and about Taiwan's collecting community?
I think the passion for collecting in any area is highly correlates to the performance of the stock market. So in the 80s, the Japanese stock market and the real estate market was doing very well. So people enjoy high PE multiples. When you have a high PE multiple, people feel money is easy to come by.
So price to earnings.
So they can spend lavishly at auctions. And so in the 80s, you see Japanese were dominates, in global auction market. But unfortunately, in the 90s, Japanese bubble collapsed. And the gravity of a collection shifted over to Hong Kong, then over to Taiwan. And in the case of Taiwan, there's some interesting backdrop worth mentioning. In the 70s, when Chinese culture was under attack during Cultural Revolution, Chiang Kai-shek in Taiwan, in order to show a contrast, so he made a great deal of effort to promote Chinese culture and art. And with the help of the National Palace Museum in Taipei, many people become aware of Chinese art, and they become very interested. And during the Cultural Revolution and afterwards, a lot of Chinese artworks were dumped out of China. So collectors in Taiwan enjoy a golden opportunity to buy many things with very low prices. I know some people buy works of art from China, not by piece, but by truckload. In one case, they even buy by container load. So that's how they started the collection. And that still continue up to very recently. And after year 2000, China kind of wake up, and now they are dominating, Chinese collector dominating market. So that's pretty big change.
Well, before we talk much about China, I want to go back a little to Japan. Jonathan, you spent the years from 2000 to 2005 living in Tokyo. Could you tell us a little bit about the Japanese and the significance of the Japanese to the global art market?
Sure. How much time do you have, Elaine? I think the first thing to say is that actually Japanese collecting is not only focused on the 1980s. Everybody talks a lot about what the Japanese were buying in the 70s and 80s. But first of all, I would have thought from the Heian period in the 8th century, there was a huge importation of Chinese works of art and later Korean works of art into Japan, and a huge recognition by the Japanese of the importance of Chinese and Korean works of art. So it's a very, very long tradition. And even there were Japanese collecting Impressionist paintings in the early 20th century. There was Baron Masaoka, whose collection became the foundation of the Western Art Museum in Tokyo. I mean, he was somebody who was actually buying directly from the artists in Paris in the early 20th century. So to think only of Japan or those sort of bubble years of the 70s and 80s is a misnomer, I think. Having said that, of course, the amount of art that was acquired by the Japanese, particularly Impressionist and modern art, in the 1970s and 80s was colossal. The Tokyo office, the evening sales in New York and the invoices were faxed. Nobody uses fax, but faxed to Tokyo. It was like 5 pages of invoice for one client. But of course, by the time that I was working in Tokyo in the early 2000s, it had been a complete reversal. And there were something like 80% of the business that Christies was doing in Japan was selling out of Japan. And it was largely the things which came last were the first to go out. But now I think it's changing in that you're going into a deeper level, and there continue to be significant sales from Japanese institutions because the reservoir of art in Japan is just so fabulous and so deep. I mean, we're very privileged, for example, to have the Fujita Museum sale, which there's some highlights on view here, which will be sold in New York. And there's amazing archaic bronzes and Chinese paintings, which are absolutely fabulous, which is really a testament, I think, to the eye and the passion and the real deep understanding of art that Japan has had. So I think Japan is an extremely important part of the art market, and the reservoir of art there means that it will continue to be so. And there are new buyers. There are buyers now. There was a client who was buying in the contemporary sales in New York just last week at a really significant level. So there's a new generation of buyers. So Japan is there. I mean, you can tell I'm very pro-Japanese.
Jonathan speaks fluent Japanese, for those of you who
On a good day. Anyway, but the point is, I think that Japan is going to be a hugely important part of the art market, has been and will be.
Thank you. Daphne, actually, I want to ask you a bit more about this transition of the family business from a business that your mother built. You joined it in 1996 and took over in 2011. What made you decide to join the family business, and how is it similar or different now that you're the one running it?
Yeah, well, I think kind of growing up in a family where culture was such a big part of it, I think it was kind of a natural transition and a natural step for me to take. It was something that I always wanted to do. And funny enough, freshman year when I was at university, I took Art History 101 thinking I was going to do this, and I actually flunked my class. And so I was quite horrified, and I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? Because this is what I've always wanted to do, and now I'm not good at it. But eventually I got over that. I ended up minoring in art history and not majoring in it. And I had, summer experiences at Christie's, and I remember also even before that, when I was young, when Christie's was starting off in Hong Kong, going to the auctions, I think they were held in hotels then, the previews, and going with my parents and looking at the ceramics and art pieces. So I think all of that kind of played into, and it was just a very natural transition and step for me to follow in my mother's footsteps and join the gallery business. Now that I've been there for, I guess, almost 20 years now, I think that there hasn't been that much that has changed. We still continue to promote Chinese contemporary art. We were one of the first galleries in Hong Kong to showcase Sao Qi on a commercial level. That was in 1993. We continue to show his works and work with actually we work with a lot of diaspora artists, and we continue to do so, like Sao Qi and Chu Chen. So I think in terms of the outlook and the vision, it hasn't really changed that much. My mother always believed in, I guess she didn't really want to be called a dealer in art. I think she was really passionate and she enjoyed collecting. She had her own collection of ceramics. She collected actually Chinese classical paintings and not as much contemporary, because she didn't want it to have a conflict with her business, but collecting was very much part of in her blood. And I think because of that, she was more kind of like she saw her job as a promoter of the arts rather than a dealer. And I think I myself also see that myself as that role. I don't feel like I'm a dealer. I rather promote the art. And in terms of that, I mean like not just making a quick sale, but also educating the public. And that's why, I'm happy to do something like this. In our gallery, we always have talks and artist talks and symposiums, because I think that that's something that's important. So I think the vision hasn't really changed that much for the gallery.
Great, thank you, Daphne. So we've heard from Jonathan about Japan. I actually want to ask Francois about France. How has the role of France and Paris and its role in the art world changed in the 47 years you've been in the industry?
Well, France is a very important country for the arts. If you think of jewelry, for instance, which is my passion and where I started at Christie's, Cartier, Van Cleef & Arpels, Boucheron, Chaumet are all French jewelers. And for those of you who go to Paris from time to time, Place Vendôme in Paris is the heart of the French high jewelry situation. In terms of artists, are Impressionists and modern, many of the artists are French. In terms of silversmiths, many of the silversmiths are French. Many of the cabinet makers are French, as much as there are English cabinet makers. But France plays a very important role in the art community. Drouot, a famous auction house, has been going on from the 16th century to still going on today. So France is an important center for creation of arts. Is France today an important trading field? No, it's not, because of very complicated laws, of import laws, export laws, high VAT from import. So France, which was in the 70s and 80s, in fact the Drouot sale room in Paris was bigger than Christie's and another auction house whose name I've forgotten now together. This is not the case today. France is a small player and is probably, in the term of the bigger picture, maybe plays a role of about, as of sales of about 6 to 7% of worldwide sales. So while France is very important in terms of creation and in terms of what it has given to the world of works of art, in terms of trading, it's today a very minor country.
But it's still important as a place for finding consignments, for exhibitions, or not so much?
Yes, it is, and this is why we have a big office in Paris. We're about 100 people, finding works of art, which we sometimes sell in Paris, but more often sell in New York and London. If tomorrow, for instance, we would keep in Paris the Impressionist and modern pictures, or the post-war and contemporary pictures, which we find in Paris, the New York and the London sale would see a big difference. We will probably be about 30 or 40% smaller than what they have at the moment. So in terms of hunting ground, of sourcing, Paris and France is very important.
Great. So I'd like to speak about one of the largest developments in the art market that we've seen, indeed, in the whole industry, which is the growth of China in terms of its collectors, its artists, auction houses, museums. I thought maybe we could start with Bob. You could tell us how the Chinese, with them entering the art market, how has that really changed collecting for you?
Well, first of all, everything got very expensive So you have to be very selective. And when you see the price tag, sometimes I feel you may wonder if that's a fair price or very much inflated. But I have seen some major changes about the Chinese taste of collecting. Recently, we can see that there's a resurgence of interest in so-called flavor of literati, the spirit of a scholar. That includes, of course, the ink paintings, but also it includes calligraphies. And now the hot item is the correspondence or personal note of some celebrities in the past. So in other words, Chinese are now more keen to collect something culture-related or history-related, or something related to celebrities they are familiar with. So I think that's a pretty good chance, pretty good change. And also because of the passion for ink paintings, now there are many new painters emerge, and they present a very good quality artworks. So that's also very exciting. Yeah.
And for Francois, Jonathan, and Daphne, in no particular order, maybe you'd like to speak a little bit about how the emergence of China might have changed the way you do business?
Definitely.
First? Okay.
Ladies first.
Yeah, it has, in several different ways. Maybe first I'll speak about in terms of the artist, because we're a gallery and we have to work with the artist. When China opened up in the 90s, it gave a lot more opportunities for foreigners to enter into China and have direct contact with artists. And I think initially the artists were thrilled, and they felt like, oh, we don't really need the art galleries anymore, because I think before Hong Kong very much played as, the role of Hong Kong was very important, I think in the late 80s and early 90s before China fully opened up, because it was kind of a bridge between the West and China. And people would come here and they would be able to purchase or see things that they wouldn't be able to get from China. So in that way, Hong Kong was an important role. But then when China opened up, these artists felt like, oh, well, we can deal directly with any foreigners who come in. We open our studio, they can come and they can buy. And so as a gallery, I think that was a big change for us. Some artists quickly realized that that was not the right way to do business, and they knew that, oh, maybe we still need a gallery, but other artists, they just decided, no, I'm going to be an artist, and I'm going to be a dealer, and I'm going to be all of that all at once. But I think that changed quite, by the 2000s, I think that definitely changed. I think that not only the artists, for the collectors as well, the learning curve was very, very fast. From a collector's point of view, in the 90s, when they first started purchasing art, these Chinese collectors, they would want to just buy big names. And they would come and they would buy them in bulk, not even thinking. They had the money and they thought this was it. They didn't care about the quality so much. They just wanted to own the big names and a lot. So they would buy lots and lots of artwork. I think later, by the 2000s, that started to change. They learned very, very quickly, and they started to do research. They realized, oh, we should buy the best of what we can afford and not necessarily in bulk. So they were becoming much more picky. Prices were going up. So I think those were the two biggest changes that I saw in kind of from the artist side and from the collector side. And now I think the Chinese collectors, they're quite sophisticated. Yeah. So.
I think one aspect for us at Christie's of the changes that we've experienced is adapting and being able to provide a good service to Chinese buyers in things such as having a Chinese language website, in having interactions in Chinese with Chinese, in having people who can look after Chinese clients when they come to New York or London or Paris. I think this is something which has been really important, and to facilitate and make it as easy as possible for Chinese buyers to participate in the sales, not just in Hong Kong, where of course we've expanded the number of people that we employ are Chinese speaking enormously, but also in all the other sales sites, because the Chinese are a really global audience and global collectors and participate in the sales all over the world. So for me, I think that's been something which we continue to try and improve, of course, but that's been one of the big things that we've tried to do. And our very presence in China. There's something like 50 people in China. We had the first offices were opened in 1994 in Shanghai, in 1996 in Beijing, so quite early, but they were comparatively small offices, and now there are 50 people, and as I hope people know, we have sales regularly in Shanghai. So it's that expansion and the inclusion and being able, as you said, you were a bridge in the 80s, or Hong Kong was a bridge. Hopefully we can be a bit of a bridge too between the Chinese collectors and the greater art market.
For me, I think it's the fact that Hong Kong is now a very important center along the lines of New York and Paris. If you had asked me 6 or 7 years ago whether there would be big sales like we have now in Hong Kong, I would have been doubtful. For a long time, Paris, New York, and London were the centers, but now you cannot count without including Hong Kong. Art Basel has now come to Hong Kong in March every year and brings thousands of clients and thousands of new collectors into this country. Some of the European galleries like Perrotin, White Cube, European and American galleries, Perrotin, White Cube, Gagosian, of course, Malingue have moved to Hong Kong. So from a city where 10 years ago there was some activity, because Hollywood Road has always been a very active area for the works of art, we are now into an international center. And again, as I was saying earlier on, this is because about 30% of what we sell in the world today, not just in Hong Kong, goes to Asia, with a large portion going to China. And we cannot not count without the Chinese buyers all around the world. So we deliver the service Jonathan has just told you about, because there is a great need from our Chinese collectors and clients to be serviced in London, Paris, New York, Geneva. If you go to Paris tomorrow, there will be 2 Chinese members of staff greeting you in Chinese and holding your hands throughout the whole auction process to make it easy for our Chinese collectors.
So besides for China, which is undoubtedly one of the largest changes that has happened to the industry in recent years, what other changes have you noticed?
Again, I think the passion for collecting is correlates to the stock market performance. And I think the stock market now is a little bit stagnant. So see a little bit retreat of the purchase activity from Chinese collectors.
That means for those who want to buy, there's less competition, yes?
Well, probably for me, because I'm more eclectic, so I don't stick to some particular area. For instance, I also collect a modern French sculpture. You know, there's a sculpture called Pierre Batte. Very powerful combination of animals and machines. I'm a main collector of his work. So you have to shift away from the crowds, find some new directions. I think, for instance, Mr. Fabio Ross is here. He's a prominent dealer of Himalayan arts. So I started collecting from his sales. I bought my first Buddhist figure from him, and then I kind of brought into this category.
Right.
And now this category, the Buddhist figures, is now very booming. And probably the most active segment of auction right now. Maybe you should ask Fabio to give us some of his experience.
Anyone else?
I think another change was what we have noticed lately is the evolution of taste of Asian collectors, age 40 to 60, who are interested in Western art. We see these collectors in our Impressionist and Modern auctions in London and New York. We see these collectors in post-war and contemporary auctions in these cities. Recently in Hong Kong, €1 million, so about 10 million Hong Kong dollars were reached for a drawing by Hergé of Tintin. So purchased by an Asian collector. So cars are purchased by collectors, by Asian collectors. 30% of our jewelry total in the world today also goes to Asian collectors. This is new. We didn't have these clients, these collectors a few years ago. So it's quite interesting to see how they move from traditional Asian art, Chinese works of art mostly, to Western categories.
I think another big change, in addition to like the international galleries and the art fairs coming to Hong Kong, is something more worldwide, is the internet. I think that changes the way people do business, the way collectors buy. In a way, I think it gives the opportunity for a lot of younger, I've seen people are starting to collect at a younger age, and I think with the internet that makes the access much easier, because it can be kind of intimidating to enter into something like this, into the auction room, to go bid for a piece that you like, or even to enter into a gallery and to start talking about the art with whoever's in the gallery. So I think with the internet, that has changed the way people do business and the way people collect art quite a bit. You know.
You took my answer. Actually, I think the other thing too is that we've talked a lot about Asia, but you shouldn't forget the breadth and the depth of the market and how that's changed. When I joined Christies in 1989, it really was North America, Western Europe, and Japan. But we've talked about China, but of course we shouldn't forget the arrival of people in the Middle East. We have sales in Dubai. There's great activity in the Middle East. We have sales now in Mumbai. In India, there are Indian buyers. We have huge participation from Southeast Asia. There's participation from Latin America. It's a really very global, in a good sense, very global market. And I think that the geographic spread and the spread of the clients, it's become much more democratic as well. And I think that's partly because of the internet, but also the role of the galleries and the auction houses. It's a much more accessible market, which I think is a wonderful thing, that more and more people can, all over the world, at any price point, because of art fairs and galleries and everything. It's just wonderful that so many more people can be part of the art market. And that democratization, if that's a word, is something which I think is really, really important and is rather special.
There's also the museum scene, which we haven't talked about. Last year, 360 museums were created in China. I know this figure by heart because it's nearly one a day, and I suppose that during Chinese New Year, no one opened the museum. But these museums have to be filled in with great works of art. So that also contributes to the development of the art market in Asia, and it's an important development which should not be overlooked.
I think another theme that we touched upon but we didn't really develop is the shift in taste towards contemporary. I think whether it's Western art or Chinese art or Asian art, once upon a time more people were looking at antiques, and now gradually it is shifting. More and more people are looking at contemporary art. So all of you have been working in the industry, working or being in as a collector this industry for decades. What has kept you interested? What has kept you in this world for so long?
Well, once you become a collector, you become a lifelong collector. But a collector doesn't mean you have to always go to buy something. Yeah, sometimes you can trade. You can sell some old stuff and buy something new. So it's a kind of a continuous interest and activities. So for instance, Robert Chan is now close to 90 years old. He's still very active. He visited almost all the major auctions across the globe. So he's an example of a lifetime collector. Yeah. So all the soldiers never died, they just fade away.
Monsieur.
For me, I think there are two issues there. First of all, I was very lucky to be hired by Christies after an internship in 1969 as someone in the department where I worked left. The head of the department was a very nice man, but he didn't want to work very late or after hours. We didn't have a human resource department at that time, so he would have had to interview for this position. And I said, "You seem to be doing a good job. Would you like to stay?" And I had loved my internship so much, and I didn't like so much reading law, which I was doing in France, that I accepted, and I've been there ever since. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that this business is a passion. You discover works of art, you meet the sellers, every seller has a different story, and it's our job to convince them to come to us rather than going to another auction house, if any other auction houses exist. And then finally you meet the buyers, which are yet another story. So the second reason is that after having started in London, I was sent to Madrid to work and open a Christie's office. In 1976, I was sent to New York to, with a couple of colleagues, open Christie's New York and develop our sale room in that country. In 2000, I was asked to go to France because 450 years after having been banned of France, the law changed and we were finally allowed to sell in Paris. So here we are setting up a Christie's in France. And finally, in 2010, I was sent here to help my colleagues, to help Jonathan, who were there already, to develop Christie's in Asia and try to find the key to the Forbidden City. So, what more passionate life can there be than to deal with vendors, important clients, or less important clients, just owners of works of art, buyers of works of art, and having worked around the world for a company which I love, doing a job which I adore. Now, I was warned before I was joining Christie's by the chairman of Europe at that time to say, François, you better be sure that you want to stop your law studies and work at Christie's. I said, why? Well, because you will see, this is a business 24/7. During the day you work like everybody in an office, but in the evening you have to go to openings of galleries and dinner parties. And normally at a dinner party, when there is a lawyer, a banker, an architect, and a doctor, and an auctioneer, the whole conversation is with the auctioneer. Everybody wants to talk about the picture which he or she has bought at Singapore airport and was told that it's an old master which nobody knows about. Or what about this little ruby which my grandmother has? I didn't bring it with me tonight, but how much do you think it's worth? And this kind of questions. So this is a business which is great, but you're 24/7 talking about this business, and even when you are on vacation, you're on a plane, reading a jewelry catalog, somebody comes to you and said, "Oh, you work for Christie's, what about this, what about that?" So you have to be very careful because it's a philosophy of life, not such a job, this Christie's. And he ended by saying, however, last night I was invited at the home of Mr. So-and-so, there was an architect, a lawyer, a banker, and a doctor. No one talked to me all evening. These are horrible people, I'll never go back to my life.
I think for me, similar to what Francois is saying, I think that it's the passion of art. I don't think that I would do this business if I weren't passionate about it. I love meeting the artist. I love helping them promote their work and putting their work into a museum collection or into an important collector or anybody's home. That to me is really interesting. I think that art is like a universal language. It can break down barriers. To me, that's really important. I think I've always seen this cross-cultural exchange, and that's why I think art is so wonderful. I don't think if I didn't have the passion, I mean, I know that in Hong Kong when we started there were a few galleries, and now there's over 100 galleries. And I meet people and they're like, oh, I want to go into the art business. It's so wonderful. It's so easy. You get some paintings, you hang it on the wall, and you sell it, and you make so much money. And I was sitting there thinking, oh, what do they know? Wait until they do it for 5 years or 10 years and see if they're still around. It is not an easy business. It's not for like just a mommy or a woman to sit around and look pretty and try to sell paintings. It's actually a man's world, as you can see. Women up here. It's very much a man's world, and it is not an easy job. So I think the passion and this thing where I feel like it's a universal language, and I can speak to anybody about it in any place in the world. That's what keeps me going.
Is it a man's world, Jonathan?
I'm not quite sure that it is a man.
Convinced
Christie's, our CEO, is now female. We have our first female CEO in Claudia's.
We have our first Chinese licensed auctioneer in the person of Red and Kwok. Many of our specialists are women. I have a feeling there are more women.
There are definitely more women
than men at Christie.
Yeah.
But
We're a minority.
How about at the top?
exactly, there are more women than men, but
The
at the
CEO
top,
is a woman.
at the top things are progressing. I wouldn't say they're quite there yet.
Maybe we should not talk about this topic. Let's talk about what's kept
I kept you in the business for so long.
Obviously, I've been kept here because I'm a man. I mean, it's just so interesting. There's never a dull moment. There's some good moments, and occasionally there are not some great moments, but it's just really interesting. And for me, there's always something new to learn. You never arrive anywhere, whether it's about the art or about the clients or about the business. There's always something new. Every day you learn something new. You never ever get to a point of stasis. You never arrive. You learn all the time. So that's one thing which has kept me going, because it's a source of endless curiosity and interest. And the second thing is actually the art, because personally I find history and the study of history and civilizations incredibly interesting. And art is such a way of looking at history and civilizations and what it means, and humanity. Not for nothing are the arts called the humanities as well, because it's about the study of humanity. And this window that art provides into civilization or into the heart and the soul of an artist is just a wonderful, wonderful experience, which I think we're really privileged to enjoy. And that's what's kept me here.
Oh, thanks, Jonathan. Looking to the future, I want to see if any of you had stories to share about the next generation, whether it's your children or your grandchildren and their interest in art, or younger colleagues that you see. What do you think might change, and what do you think would endure?
Well, younger generations need a lot of education. I think nowadays you see kids, they don't read books, they don't even read newspaper. They all day long they look at their cell phones. And so if you want to teach young generation about history, art, and so forth, I don't know, I feel it's quite difficult. So maybe in the future you can figure out some kind of fast food recipe to teach the young generations about art. To me, I think it's quite difficult. Yeah.
Well, I guess I can speak from experience. I have 3 kids, and I'm hoping that I've done a good job in the way that my mother has in offering them kind of a cultural upbringing, and that they would eventually want to follow in my footsteps, although right now they are like, no way. Recently, though, my son, who's really passionate about music, he saw in the newspaper that a manuscript by a particular composer, Mahler, was up for auction at one of the auction houses, and and he was so excited. And I thought, oh, okay, we'll just go and have a look. It was touring. It wasn't for sale here in Hong Kong, but it came to Hong Kong. So I took him to the office, went up and took the thing out of the case, and my son spent over an hour flipping through this script, just looking and looking at it, and was so fascinated. And I thought, oh, maybe in the future he could work at one of the auction houses in this department. Oh, he's so passionate about music. But yeah, so that's my kind of story, and hoping that the next generation will continue to love art and be passionate about it.
How old is he?
He's 17 now. 17. Yeah, so maybe an internship.
Any thoughts, Jonathan or Francois, maybe in your younger colleagues?
Well, this is a rather more general comment, but given that art is the universal language, and given the connection between people is so important, and at the slight risk of sounding political, in a world in which there seem to be so many rules going up, that I really truly hope that art will provide for future generations a deep human connection.
All right, I thought I'd like to open to the floor for questions. Any questions from the audience? Well, I have one last question, if there's nothing from all of you. Could you speak about a particular significant work of art that has passed through your hands?
Okay. I have one particular
It's a nice story.
ceramics. This is a brush pot which I bought in 2007. And then next year in 2008, there was a big earthquake in Sichuan. So with that disasters, I felt very difficult. What's that?
Airplane? Helicopter?
I felt very awkward and difficult to keep buying things if we don't show any care for those victims. So I decided to take out to auction again, and then I donate the proceeds to the effort of providing relief to the earthquake victims. So it's actually the most expensive one I bought. I spent 67 million Hong Kong in 2007. And then I sold it for 65. Because of the one good friend of mine, who is also a playmate of Mahjong with me, he was very interested in this. So I told him that, okay, I put this to auction, and then you come to buy, and I will price it a little bit lower. So if you bought it, then you can, together we can do something good. And then I got a relief, so I can keep buying things. So once mostly my friends bought it at a discount. And he was very happy, and I was very satisfied. And by the way, my friend just passed away this month. So he fought against the liver cancer for 50 years. And he showed a great courage and wisdom in dealing with so this is kind of a very memorable piece. Yeah. I think that probably later on we can send to you for auction again. Yeah.
And will you buy it again?
Well, I'm not. I think once it's in the market, I can watch where it goes. It's quite interesting.
I think that means maybe.
Maybe, yeah. Okay, that's one of my.
I think what's so wonderful is with works of art, there are always these great personal stories attached to them. François?
For me, it was a tiny little red diamond of 95 pointers. So 95 pointers is less than a cat. It's a little bit like the center of a cherry, which we had from a farmer in the United States in Minnesota who had it in his house because his father had collected colored diamond. This was in 1987. At that time, colored diamond were not of great interest. In fact, no one much bought them. Everybody wanted white diamonds, but not colored diamond. And we took that tiny little red thing, but it was so red that I had never seen a red diamond like that. I knew they existed, but I had never seen one. We sent it to the gemological laboratory to test it, to make sure it was a good diamond, and they said they had never seen one like that either. So we didn't know how to price it. We put it in for $100,000 US dollars, which already was quite a lot of money. There was so much interest before the auction that I called the seller, who was this farmer in Minnesota, and I said, well, if you could be on the phone by 5 or 5:15 tomorrow afternoon, I think you'll have good news. Your diamond will go through the roof. And he said, what time again? I said, between 5 and 5:15. He said, terribly sorry, I'm milking my cow between 5 and 6, and I cannot be disturbed. The diamond will wait, but the cows cannot wait. The stone finally went for $900,000, so nearly $1 million a cat. And then for a very long time, it was a world record for a diamond. At that time, if I made the calculation, an ounce of this material would have been worth $41 million. Dollar was, I don't know, $300 at the time. So that little diamond will always remain in my memory. And that farmer, when I called him an hour after his cows were milked, said, oh, that's fine, I'm very happy, and he hung up. So he was not very much interested in money. And $1 million is a lot of money today, but in 1987 it was even much more money. So that's my little red diamond story.
From the farmer in Minnesota.
All right, my stories are not that interesting. There's too many pieces of works of art that I would love to have. And I think the piece that I'm going to talk about is something that I still have, and it hasn't really passed through me yet because I'm kind of a hoarder. It was a gift that I received from my mother. It was a Wallenstein painting. I was only 18 at the time, and she asked me, what do you want for your 18th birthday? It was kind of a big birthday. And I said I wanted a painting, and she said, okay, you pick whatever you want. So I picked this beautiful Wallenstein painting that still hangs in my home today. And I'm hoping that when one of my kids turn 18, that I will then pass it on to them. And so it could be like a family heirloom type of thing.
Okay. Can I have two things, Elaine?
Sure.
Thank you.
Why not?
No, it's a pair. It's a pair, so it's worth more.
Actually, they're not. They couldn't be more different. In one of my previous lives at Christie's, I looked after musical instruments, and one of the most magical moments for me was when we sold the Kreutzer Stradivari of 1727 to the great Russian violinist Maxim Vengerov, because that was a great moment of matching a great violin with one of the greatest players who could then use it to give enormous pleasure to thousands and thousands of people all over the world. So that was a great moment. And the second great moment, which both Robert and Francois will remember, was when the Mingfang Lei, this amazing archaic bronze, was brought back from a sale in New York privately to the Hunan Provincial Museum in China to be reunited with its lid, which had remained in China, even though the body had been outside for 100 years, and to reunite them together to great fanfare and excitement in Hunan was, again, another of those sort of really magical and deeply satisfying memories.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank all of you for your stories. If you're interested to learn more stories, Phaidon published this great book titled Going Once, and we have copies of that by the door should you wish to purchase one. Thank you again, Bob, Francois, Daphne, Jonathan, for sharing your experiences with us. Thank you for coming. I hope you enjoy the rest of the previews, and I look forward to 250 more years of culture, taste, and collecting.
Thank you, Elaine.